Hi everybody, Alan Denman here, novelist, writer, part filmmaker. Welcome to Storyteller, bringing you thoughts, ideas, exercises and insights and hopefully some inspiration into the art of storytelling. And this is for both writers and non-writers because I believe these are two ends of the same stick that, the more you understand storytelling, the way it works, and why it works and why it doesn't work, the better you will be as a writer and the more you will appreciate story in any form, whether it's a novel or a film or a television series. They're all narrative forms. And last week I introduced to you, or the last podcast I introduced to you, what I think is the greatest secret of storytelling, and that is that you have to get your audience through the proscenium arch, your reader through the proscenium arch into the world of the story. And there is a way to do this, and it's very fundamental. And you, in some way, rouse our emotion so that we feel something for the protagonist. And that protagonist could be a mouse in an animation, it could be a young child, it could be a man or a woman, old or young, and so forth. Whoever the protagonist is, we must be invited to feel something for them. And there's a number of ways you can do that. It may be that you present qualities that are highly admirable, so we want to admire them. You may present qualities where we feel very sympathetic towards them. It may be that we feel fear for them in some way because they're in danger. And that emotion roused, this is the way our brain wiring works, that emotion roused stimulates emotion, and that emotion stimulates our imagination, and it prepares us for passing through the proscenium arch and into the world of story. And this is really a very simple, fundamental idea. And I quoted last time the example of the pantomime that I directed, and within seconds, a little girl in the front row was saying to Cinderella, "Don't be upset." She was already relating to her and feeling something. And we do the same as adults. We're just a bit slower to, have our emotions. We're not quite so open as children are, but nevertheless, it's the same principle. A good story will rouse our attention, our emotion in some way, and we start to feel something towards the protagonist. And when that happens, we are starting to pass through the proscenium arch into the world of the story. And if you don't achieve that as a storyteller, then I think you haven't really crossed the first hurdle. You've got to be able to do that. So think about the way you present your protagonist. And I thought, because I believe that, a lot of what I write is very much an exploration of storytelling itself. So when I'm writing, I'm also thinking about how I can get the story to work, how I can rouse people's emotion. So I thought that as a sort of an experiment, I would read you the opening of one of my novels. It's called, I'm just about to republish it under a new title called Unstuck. And it is the story of a young man's journey of self-discovery. And he begins, because it's called Unstuck, he begins very stuck. All right. And so I'll read a little bit of this, then I'll say something, and I might read a little bit more. Once upon a time, there was a young man called James Smith, or more precisely, James Howard Smith. He was 24 years old, and everyone who met him called him not Jim, or Jimmy, or Jimbo, but James, plain, boring James, which is exactly how he liked it. He didn't want to stand out or be noticed or be extraordinary in any way. He had very few friends, not even on Facebook. He didn't have a Facebook account. He had one friend called Bernard Tibble. Bernard had long, straggly hair and was always depressed. And when he and James did share a soapy pint of British ale together, their conversation was always the same. Life was unfair and England were never, ever going to win the World Soccer Cup again. Even for James, who was a great adherent of predictability, Bernard was very uninteresting. They parted amicably and remained friends, in theory. James also had a girlfriend. Her name was Melissa. She had frizzy hair. She was all right, but she was always trying to change him and come up with new things for them to do. She was the opposite of Bernard. She was very unpredictable. They parted amicably and remained friends, in theory. So that's my first page. And something I would say about relatability is that the more ordinary a character is, the more likely we are to relate to them, because we see ourselves as ordinary. If you have a protagonist who's super powerful, super wealthy, well, most people aren't super powerful or wealthy, so it's much harder to relate to them. So, I deliberately chose a character who he's so young, he's a bit naive and geeky, and he is very much stuck in his ways, and he's very ordinary. He just called James, And then I follow that through. So I'm hoping at this point you might think, you might not be terribly interested in him. He's okay, but why am I reading a story about a young man who's actually very boring? Well, it gets a little bit more interesting in a moment. James was the only son of Tom and Jennifer Smith, a happy, well-adjusted couple who lived in a busy town in southern England. They were unlike their son in almost every other aspect. They loved Latin American dancing, doubles tennis, badminton, and almost every social activity in their area. They helped organise charity fairs and Christmas hampers for the poor and needy. And every year, Tom, who was chairman of the local Giant Vegetable Society, almost single-handedly organised the annual competition to see who could grow the biggest leeks and cabbages. He and Jennifer also liked to travel to unusual countries every year. Even as a baby, James perplexed Tom and Jennifer. He insisted on eating exactly the same food every day and refused to be enticed by a slice of exotic, juicy mango or rare, robust French cheese. Was this some recessive gene at work, they wondered? They consulted their respective family trees to discover if there was a relative somewhere who displayed similar rigid eating habits, but to no avail. There was no rational explanation for James's behaviour, other than that at a very early age he had made a decision that his life was going to be utterly predictable, and that he would use his infantile diet to demonstrate this. Eventually, Tom and Jennifer gave up trying to change their son and with bewildered resignation accepted him as he was. Fish fingers, grey school uniforms, a watch that kept perfect time, and homework that got consistent B's. This was what constituted the childhood of James Howard Smith. Okay, so he's very different to his parents. His parents are quite the opposite, outgoing, sociable, living a varied life and so forth. And, they've tried hard, but they're puzzled. So we might feel something for them. But most of all, we know that this book is called Unstuck. And the tagline on the cover reads, James Howard Smith leaves his comfort zone. So we already know, when we're reading the story now, that he is not going to be able to stay in this state. So hopefully there's enough here to interest you and you think, well, okay, I'll give it a whirl. It is also a comic story, comedy. Obviously there are certain things, the local Giant Vegetable Society, a little boy who only eats fish fingers, all these things, slightly comic touches. And also comedy writing tends to have a different rhythm to it as well. It's kind of more bouncy. So I'm just going to read you. Now we come, in effect, to where the story really begins. There was one thing that James was, it was consistent. As a young man finding his way in the world, he turned up exactly on time at Edward and Thompson's chartered accountants and did exactly what was required of him. With studious care and metronomic regularity, he added and subtracted numbers all day, every day, Monday to Friday. Numbers were clear and uncomplicated and totally predictable. 2 plus 2 would always equal 4. Mr. Thompson and Mr. Edwards, chartered accountants, both pale, podgy and balding, were very pleased to have such a reliable employee, though they privately, and with some relief, were also delighted that James displayed no signs of ambition and would appear to be happy to number crunch for the following 40 years. So it was at the end of each predictable day, James would return to his small, one-bedroom apartment in a grey side road, microwave his supermarket meal for one, and settle down to play his Xbox and shoot 300 alien invaders. His sleep was dreamless and undisturbed, and he woke each morning to his neat grey suit hanging in wait, his bowl of cornflakes, and the 8:33 number 24 bus that would drop him precisely 15 yards, 2 feet and 3 inches from the door to Edward and Thompson's chartered accountants. Life was perhaps not blissful, but it was safe, secure, and completely predictable. But of course, as has been noted by sages throughout the ages, nothing in life remains the same. And so it was for James Howard Smith also. His life was about to change. So that's how it begins. I'm going to record the whole novel and put it on a series of podcasts which will go out. I'll probably put them just as audio on YouTube. So that's something to look out for, so you can hear it like an audible version of the story. And I think now what I might be feeling as a writer is I am fearing for James, because I know, being the writer, that his world is going to fall apart. And somebody once said, I think it was the motivational speaker Tony Robbins, that we fear change more than we fear death. And so this is going to be major disruption when James's world falls apart. How it falls apart, you have to come back and listen to the Audible when I get it up there, or buy the book as well. And I'm going to finish there, but send me your comments. Did any emotion got awoken in you? Did you find yourself starting to be interested, feel some sympathy for James Howard Smith? And, please go to my website as well, which is now up and running. And my friend has done a fabulous, work on the website. It is what I call my writer's emporium. There are my novels, short stories, articles, poems, videos on there. So it is like an emporium that you can go in and you could probably spend hours in there if you want to, with lots of interesting things to read and look at. So that's it for this week. Thank you very much, and please send me your comments, send me your thoughts, and I always try to reply when you send me a message. And that is it for today. Thank you very much.